Hello, and welcome to Chicago Chorale's fifth installment of Bruce's Brats, or How the Sausage is Made. I'm Bruce Tamman, conductor of Chicago Chorale. Today I'm going to talk about an unusual project that Chorale has worked on this winter. A setting of the Kyrie text from the Mass, adapted as an a cappella motet to the incidental music composed by Edvard Grieg for Henrik Ibsen's play Peer Gynt. First, something about Ibsen's play. Henrik Ibsen is Norway's most famous playwright and was active in the second half of the 19th century during a period of growing nationalism preceding independence from Sweden in 1905. Most of his plays were about contemporary realistic subjects. Peer Gynt, however, is loosely based on a Norwegian fairy tale, and the principal character, Per, resembles the Norwegian folk character Askeladden, the mythical ne'er-do-well youngest son who is always in trouble and is thought to be a useless braggart, but ends up doing surprising things. In Ibsen's play, after a series of misadventures, Per is forced to leave his family's home and his devoted mother, Åsa, and builds a remote cabin in the mountains. Soon after this, though, Åsa dies, and Per leaves Norway to lead a fantastic, wandering life, always just the jump ahead of trouble, returning finally to Norway in the end, to die. Per's father and mother are thought to be based on Ibsen's own parents. Ibsen's father was a well-to-do merchant who lost everything and went bankrupt, and he left his family when Ibsen was 8. Ibsen was raised by his mother, along with his siblings, in relative poverty on a rundown farm outside of town. She's pictured in this silhouette in happier, more prosperous times. The character of Per can be interpreted as being a representation of Ibsen himself. There are striking similarities to Ibsen's own life. Leaving home as a young man, Ibsen spent 27 years living abroad, and he never returned to his hometown. Peer Gynt was first published in 1867, but was not performed until 1876. Ibsen asked Edvard Grieg, the noted Norwegian composer, to write incidental music to accompany the premiere performance. Though trained in Leipzig in the German style, Grieg was himself a Norwegian nationalist who worked to develop a recognizable Norwegian style based on native folk music. So he was an obvious choice for this project. His original score consisted of 90 minutes of music, and he had a very hard time composing it. He called the commission a terribly unmanageable subject. He complained about the patchwork quality of what he was required to compose, which was very confining. Each set piece ended up being far shorter than he wanted. He returned to the score 10 years later and extracted 8 sections, which he worked into 2 orchestral suites. These suites became some of his most popular and enduring music, regularly performed by orchestras throughout the world. Grieg included his set music for The Death of Åsa, Per's mother, as the second movement of Suite No. 1. Originally scored for string orchestra, It is a tragic, deeply moving soliloquy on death and is often performed and recorded in a piano version, as well as in the original string orchestration. Grieg frequently touches on the subject of motherhood in his songs. He sets poems that compare his home, Norway, to a mother, that depict a young mother weeping at the grave of her child, the death of a young wife and mother, the death of an elderly mother. Grieg was a prolific songwriter and took numerous concert tours of the European continent, accompanying his wife, Nina, a soprano, on piano. These tours were a financial success for the couple, and the songs were published in both Norwegian and German for sale to the public. But Grieg was perhaps too successful at setting his native language, and his songs don't work all that well in German translation. They really can't compete with the wealth of German lieder composed during the 19th century. And few singers take the time to learn them in the original Norwegian. Most of them are rarely heard now, and that's a pity. They're beautiful songs, and as personal and powerful as Grieg's short piano pieces. And among the best of them are his songs about motherhood. It clearly was a subject that interested him deeply. Last fall, Choral Stream, a site on Facebook, featured a recording by an ensemble called Illumino, based in Ireland, of an adaptation of The Death of Ossa for a cappella choir. I listened, and I was immediately drawn to its appropriateness. Musically, it brought to mind those songs of Grieg's which I had loved, and it was uniquely suited to the text which John O'Neill, the arranger, had chosen. Grieg's music falls naturally into two-bar phrases, which perfectly matches the scansion of the text. Kyrie Eleison, Christe Eleison, Kyrie Eleison. Other texts might not have been suited to this somewhat choppy bar structure. Even the secondary accents of the words, Kyrie Eleison, line up ideally. This rhythmic pattern remains consistent throughout the adaptation. There's never a moment of awkwardness. By using a short, repeated, somewhat neutral text, O'Neill stays out of the way of Grieg's music, and Grieg's dark, rich harmonies dominate the listener's experience. Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy is beyond all else a cry from the deepest recesses of the human experience, a cry too deep for words. And one feels that Grieg's response to motherhood, especially to a mother's death, is very much one with his artistic expression, and it inspires his most profound musical outpouring. The recording on YouTube by Illumino is slower and more mournful than Chorale's version. I wanted to try for more urgency, more of a demand, even an angry demand on the part of the choir, grabbing God and forcing him to see our pain and respond to it. MacNeil also truncated Grieg's ending. Instead of continuing with Grieg's complicated late romantic harmonic development, O'Neill goes with an ABA form, which is a logical response to the Kyrie, Christe, Kyrie text, and then ends with a coda, beginning in bar 25, which repeats the words eleison, 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 with decrescendo and ritardando to the end of the piece in bar 32. previous virtual choir productions have all had, at their base, a recording of the piece at hand, previously recorded by chorale. Though the singers work in isolation from their own homes, they sing along with themselves, fitting in with a familiar sound and character of expression. For this project, we had no such model. Our pre-recorded model was provided by our accompanist, Kit Bridges, who produced a keyboard recording of the work from his home in Evanston. He and I consulted on tempo and nuances and managed the recording in 3 takes. Then I produced a video from my home conducting Kit's playing. We provided the singers with both, and they sang in isolation to Kit's playing and my conducting. And this is how we do choir these days. We all look forward to the end of this pandemic, to singing physically together, seeing and hearing one another, and to singing for a live audience too. But until that day arrives, we'll continue to work on these virtual projects to keep our art alive in the pandemic darkness.